Yeah, thanks, Kelly, and thanks, Laura and Edward, for inviting us today. My favourite childhood cartoon is probably Hong Kong Phooey, but I'm probably showing my age a bit there. But anyway, Katie will introduce herself in a minute or two. But Katie and I come from we really come at today's topic from quite different disciplinary backgrounds. I'm a researcher in education. For the last few years, I've been working with my colleague here at Southampton, Dr. Sarah Luthwaite, on her research project looking at the teaching of digital accessibility in higher education and the workplace. But Katie and I share quite significant experience in working with and conducting research with people with learning disabilities, intellectual disabilities, and that whole thing around inclusive and participatory research approaches. We've both been involved in recent quite major ESRC funded projects with learning disabled communities. And today we are drawing on a recent smaller scale project with experts by experience, exploring the use of generative AI to create accessible texts. And I'll be talking a bit more about that in a bit. And we want to really expand on this in ways that will hopefully prompt discussion later on perhaps wider aspects of accessible communication and digital inclusion, and also teaching and learning, I hope. So, so with that, that's enough for me for now. I'll hand over to Katie.
Great, thank you. Can you see the slides okay? Is that...
Yes,
Brilliant.
yes, we can,
Katie. Thank you.
Slides are perfect.
All right. So, yeah, so I'll just give a little bit more background about me. So, as well as working with people with learning disabilities and research projects, I really come from linguistics and communication background. So sort of different to Andy, but we have that kind of overlap there. So today we're going to talk about easy read and plain language. Easy read's really the area that I've worked on most in the sort of research field. Then we'll talk about Gen AI sort of tools in this field that are developing or quite new. And then I will pass over to Andy, and he'll tell you a bit more about our project and sort of the issues and challenges there. And then we're looking forward to having a discussion and finding out what you, what kind of things that you need really, and to learn around about in this area. Okay, so first of all, about easy read and accessible information. There's lots of different terms about easy read, easy English, easy to read, and I know it's quite confusing, so I just wanted to kind of give a bit of a background there. Easy read is clear text using short sentences and common words, and it's combined with images to make information easier to understand for people, and it's generally for people with learning disabilities when it's easy read. There are different names used for this sometimes. So in Europe, it's called easy language quite a lot. I think there's a couple of other countries that say easy read. There's easy English, which is a sort of type of easy read in Australia. And there's easy to read, which is quite often confusingly used as a sort of umbrella term for easy read and plain language. So it's sort of confusing. So how does easy read relate to plain language? I've just sort of put this very simple diagram at the bottom, and if we think about it in terms of a spectrum, and it's sort of easier to place them. So if we think about on the left, there's technical language. So this might be something like complex academic paper or a hard instruction manual. And we get to standard text. So it'd be generic everyday language, and then plain language where people have thought about the constructing it in a way that removes barriers to understanding. And then even simpler still is easy read. So this one is very sort of formulaic and includes images. So the images are quite often photos, but they could really be anything. So diagrams, some companies and translators prefer to use, symbols, or a sort of combination of all different mediums. So who can benefit? So from Easy Read, it's people largely with learning disabilities and cognitive impairments. And for these people, it's considered a alternative format, so like Braille, and can be provided or requested as a reasonable adjustment. But of course, because it's sort of using clear language and images and removing those barriers to understanding, it's also useful for lots of other people as well. So people with low literacy, people who speak English as an additional language. So quite often refugees and asylum seekers benefit from very clear language in the asylum system. In stressful situations where there's a sort of a cognitive barrier to taking on any more information. Also for people in a hurry or haven't read the report and they just want the summary, the easy read version, or who are multitasking and sort of listening and reading at the same time. So you can see that it's useful for lots of different people, increasing sort of reach to different audiences. Compliance is obviously an important thing, but also inclusion, really the most important result. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the user side of it. So I'm an Easy Read translator and test my translations with user groups and individuals, and it's really interesting and useful part of the essential part of the process, really. And I just wanted to add some information, some quotes here from some of our users, just to explain what they like about it. So I like it when people use simple words and no jargon. When I see the Easy Read logo, it makes me feel happy. So that kind of really shows you something that maybe people don't think about when they're writing a document. It's that sort of emotional connection and sort of welcome, really, through seeing something that they know they can understand. Another person really stressed this, who had a job and really felt that it was essential to that. So he says, I like to have the agenda and minutes for my meetings in Easy Read. It helps me. I can't read the edge of that. But yeah, it helps me. So he sort of felt included and was able to do his job because of that sort of extra step that was made in terms of communication. And lastly, this is really important to think about in terms of Easy Read and the whole sort of process and seeing it sort of in place in the context. So I like using Easy Read, but I don't ask for it. I wait for them to give it to me, which is interesting in that you might put a lot of effort into making an Easy Read document, but if it's not thought about how that might sort of be disseminated or given out, or where people might access it, it might not get used. So that's an important aspect. So the academic research on Easy Read is quite limited. I think Andy's going to refer to a couple later on. We've got some in our slides that we can send you. And the guidelines largely come from sort of practice. And there's quite sort of lively debates at the moment about what is Easy Read, what to include. And sort of involving both sort of practice-based knowledge as well as academic research. So I've just put some links there in terms of where this comes from. So we've got the Easy Language International Network, which is a network of practitioners and academic researchers and some advocacy groups, but we could definitely have more, welcome more. We also have an Easy Read community of practice where international sort of groups of translators debate about what is Easy Read and how to make it work and what's the best thing to do, and it sort of shows up how it's done differently in different countries, and it shows you sort of different cultures of Easy Read. And then recently, as part of the UK Association of, I think that's alternative formats actually, I might have put the wrong word there, UCAF, we have started a standards group. So we're really sort of collating all this knowledge and trying to agree a UK standards. So UCAF are also responsible for Braille, audio large print, and e-text standards for accessibility. So that's really exciting sort of progress there. And another sort of key area we can draw on a lot is the W3C CAG guidelines. There's a group of people sort of working around clear language there, and we're making content usable document, which provides a lot of really helpful, really useful sort of information. And we can also draw a lot from content design, which is a sort of a big new area, I feel, and it's something that we can learn from. in terms of the process of designing information. So I just want to briefly go over the characteristics of EasyRead, but they're really just, we can sort of draw on these again later in some shared guidelines. So you can sort of basically split it into these bigger areas. So content, so the EasyRead is often shorter, and summaries of the original. The content is quite often reordered and especially sort of put in chronological order if that's sort of relevant to the content. Information is reorganized in other ways. So we've got a very plain front page, so it's not overwhelming. In sort of user tests, we found that putting lots of information can really just switch people off completely. Easy navigation is really important, and chunking information and sort of having really clear section breaks. Front-loading information is also really important as well, and giving people a clear idea about what the document's about, so they're not reading things unnecessarily. Reading is obviously very tiring for some people. And obviously a big area is the language use. So we have to really think about carefully any sort of active and passive constructions. So passive constructions can hide who does the action of something. Sometimes that's done intentionally in documents and sort of making that explicit for accessibility reasons, because it's easier to understand, can sometimes cause problems depending on the document itself. So there's a few other things here, but I'll try not to go on about them, because we can talk about them later perhaps. And lastly, the sort of visual aspects are really important. So in the UK, we have the image on the left in EasyRead and the text on the right. Mostly, we sort of all conform to that standard, but in other countries, they have it the other way around. So it's sort of interesting cultural differences in how things are done and why. And I just wanted to sort of introduce you now to a few tools that I'm aware of. And I know it's so fast moving, this sector, as I'm sure you know. So there may be some new ones that come up, and maybe there's some that you can share with us later. So I wanted to mention photo symbols, even though they have not, I don't think they've really formally launched this yet. Photo symbols is the sort of biggest image bank for EasyRead documents, and they have just recently launched this or worked on this EasyMaker. So this is sort of software where you can put your text in and then just translate it into EasyRead. They're based in Bristol in the UK. It's English only, and they have one level, so there's only one level of difficulty, I believe. They did a lot of the work in developing this product, this tool, with advocacy groups, and they continue to do so. So that's a really positive step. This platform uses text and image, so the images are drawn from this really extensive image bank. And the output is unusually, as you can see here from this, from the website, sort of a web-based, mobile-friendly and spoken audio. So it's really sort of thinking about the whole, environment in which people use and need information. So that's really good. And they have a lot of templates. So that's really interesting. It is paid for, but they do have a lot of sort of free information on their website. I wanted to highlight this one too, because it's public sector, and it's open source, which is really rare in this sort of mini field of AI, I think. So it was built by Swindon Council in the UK. It's English, but EasyRead is in English, and you can then translate it into lots of different languages. It again has text and images. So the images this time not drawn from a database, an image bank, but they use AI. So Stability AI's Stable Diffusion. I've not tried this. I don't know what it's like, but I would love to. It was developed initially with an advocacy group. I'm not sure in terms of, I don't know how that's sort of developed later. And it's been really important in sort of cutting translation costs for councils. So, it's a really positive thing for councils to have. So this one, as I understand, is something that you would have to develop as an organization. And then I just wanted to highlight some sort of slightly different tools that are for, like this one is TIGIM. It's for sorry, it's for businesses really. They're based in Ireland. It's in English, and it has sort of one level of simplification, I suppose. So they really are business oriented. It's about sort of helping e-commerce and sort of adapting to develop the business, and it's a whole system approach. However, it's a paid for tool, but they do have 4 free tools. So you can see here sentiment analysis, brain pain, which I think is, yeah, it's basically cognitive load, making sure it's not too onerous. Readability, which there are some issues with readability formulas, and an everyday word checker. So they might be of interest and useful. You can see here's a picture just showing you how quite difficult a word is. And there's a couple of others from Europe. So we have Capito AI, based in Austria. So they have 6 languages and 3 different levels. So that's quite different to the ones that we have in the UK. In that they kind of think about how they use the sort of common European framework of sort of different different levels of English that people might use. So again, it's a similar sort of setup. You paste your text in and it translates into easy read. You can see here on this picture they've got different sort of strategies of sort of personalizing or changing the language, thinking about word choice or grammar or style. And again, use readability formulas. This is another one, some AI. So these are both paid for, I should say. There's a few other languages, just one level, which they say is A1 to A2. It's text only, but they said image generation is coming soon, which I assume must be AI images. This one states that it's trained for plain language and rules for refining translations. Everyone's not very sort of clear and on how they do things, so it's quite difficult to compare in that aspect. Yeah, so it should be interesting to see what they do. And I liked this one because they said it highlights that the user needs knowledge of the original content to verify whether it's a good translation, and that final decision is with a human. Of course, they should all be. Anyway. And then I just sort of added in another couple here that I thought were interesting, but I think they are probably quite similar to tools that you use already, maybe things like Grammarly. So this is a medical document readability tool that the NHS have. GK-based, it's English only, text only, and it's more sort of plain language oriented. It uses the Flesch-Kincaid readability formula like Word, but it also gives the option to exclude medical terms, so which might normally sort of flag something up as complex. So I like the idea that it sort of thinks about the context there. And some words you really just have to use. Okay, and here's a similar sort of one from Hemingway, which we'll send you all of those. So it was a bit of a sort of run through of all the tools that I'm aware of, but I'd be really interested to know if there are any sort of others that you know of. So I'd love to hear that, and I'll hand over to Andy now to talk about our project.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. That was great. Do you want to stop sharing so I can? Thank you. So I will. Thanks. So hopefully you can see that okay. So yeah, just a quick overview of the project that Katie and I conducted just last year. So the British Journal of Learning Disabilities is a world-leading journal in the field, and for several years now, authors have been required to provide accessible summaries of their articles alongside the sort of the standard abstracts. And we were asked by the journal editor to explore how generative AI, I'll use the shortened term Gen AI, if that's okay with everyone from now on, can potentially sort of help authors who are submitting articles to draft these sort of accessible summaries. So we did this through collaborating with Users by Experience in a series of participatory workshops. We conducted 3 2-hour workshops over consecutive weeks with 5 members of Open Storytellers at their base in Frome in Somerset. And we also had support during the sessions from a staff member, the social enterprise manager. All but one of the group had prior experience of co-producing or checking of Easy Read, working with Katie and others. And actually one member, interestingly, did have prior experience of using Gen AI as well, which was really interesting. So yeah. I think it's important to make the point here that we really adopted an ethics-first approach to sort of framing and running these workshops, ensuring that we provided, appropriate guidance and support to the group throughout, highlighting relevant risks around using Gen AI. We provided an information sheet prior to the workshops, in Easy Read, of course. But we also held sort of open and quite frank discussions at the beginning and the end of each workshop around sort of the process and everything. And project outputs were a report and a guide for authors. So we selected 12 journal articles to use in our workshops, and these varied in scope and sort of article type and topic. Some of the topics were nominated by the group. We drew on the groups. Firstly, we really drew on the group's expertise in sort of quality checking those accessible summaries. We then familiarized the group with using a range of Gen AI tools. We did an exercise on a separate sort of text and topic that was familiar to them. And then we conducted a series of activities using Gen AI, using the articles as source texts to explore different, prompts and combinations of prompts to create our own accessible summaries to then compare with the originals. We then reviewed them as a group, and out of all of that, we developed our sort of key findings and recommendations. Katie and I did do some additional work outside of the workshops, sort of supporting the structure of the workshops, exploring different prompts and sequences, etc., but also doing some comparative testing between the different tools. So just a few sort of key observations. I think we did see a lot of reinforcing of sort of fundamental Easy Read principles, some of which Katie has already outlined, using common words and phrases, having just one key idea per sentence or bullet point, active rather than passive voice, that type of thing. But we did see during the course of the workshops really unprompted sort of quite creative use by the members of the group that were totally unprompted by Katie or I. They started exploring sort of poetry, asking these Gen AI tools to do a summary as a poem and things like that. So it was really interesting to see how they adapted and adopted different quite explorative and creative sort of approaches to this. We also saw some quite supplementary use of the tools to support the actual process, such as asking the tools to define certain keywords, and particularly when we came across sort of jargon and things like that. Now, the accessibility of the tools themselves did become an issue during the workshop. We saw things like text and voice support, customization, sort of read aloud options, those sorts of things did vary considerably across these tools. But the workshops also did prompt some discussion about wider aspects of making research more accessible and sort of academic work generally more accessible. such as whether members of the group would feel comfortable about contacting authors, for example. You know, that was a really interesting sort of aspect. So key findings and recommendations. In terms of actually developing the prompts to use in these tools, that's sort of prompt engineering. There was a whole range of different things that we drew on. Dividing the process into separate successive sort of subtasks was a key thing. Rather than using the whole of the article as a key source, a key sort of text, you know, using specific sections if we wanted to find out about, you know, just the methodology, etc. Identifying key elements within the text, keywords, quotations, that type of thing. And certainly when it came to developing the summaries, you know, use of bullet points, headings, highlighting keywords, etc. Asking, for example, to summarize, you know, in 12 sort of bullet points, which then manually could be sort of merged and developed into 6, you know, that type of thing. So we saw that sort of development between sort of more manual working with what these tools were producing. One important thing is that we did try using terms like easy read, easy language, plain language, some of these different terms that Katie has mentioned. And really, Gen AI obviously drawing on their understanding of these terms did produce some pretty inappropriate results really from doing that, you know, quite sort of inappropriate terms, quite babyish sort of language, you know. So you know, clearly we sought to not to pursue that in terms of using that. And in terms of sort of more general practices, we can use Gen AI tools to help evaluate the final output. So when we do come up with a final sort of summary or whatever, we can actually use the tools to evaluate them in different ways, which is interesting. I've already mentioned that thing around, you know, very much the manual sort of tasks and editing alongside what these tools are producing. So that sense that, you know, these tools, these technologies should be really supporting or enhancing rather than totally replacing the more sort of manual human aspects. And the final edit should always be a human one. I think that was one of the key things that came out of the workshop. As I say, we can explore those different accessibility options in terms of the tools themselves. And, you know, certainly the workshop environment that we created, I think, you know, really emphasize those collaborative and inclusive approaches to you know, doing this type of work. And with my sort of educator hat on, you know, really documenting the process and really, you know, understanding that each of these different tasks and subtasks can be seen as learning opportunities. You know, realizing what is going on here when we are using these tools to create these summaries, you know, having that understanding and ensuring that that users understand that, you know, the processes that are involved, I think is a really important thing. So I do want to sort of finish now by drawing out some key themes from all of this. So clearly we recognize the capability of Gen AI to summarize, you know, lengthy and complex texts into formats that are more accessible. But it is useful, I think, to draw on sort of existing models and protocols associated with, if you like, traditional easy reproduction, the type of things that Katie has explained, with the potential of generative AI. And there is an interesting tension here, I think, between these traditional methods of bespoke, co-production and checking with experts by experience around specific texts, which is inclusive and collaborative and authentic, but is by necessity and also quite deliberately, I think, it's a slow and labor-intensive process that is often quite costly as well. It is important that we pay these guys, these guys who are helping us with this, really important that they are paid to do this. So comparing that with these emergent AI-generated methods, which are obviously rapid, highly scalable, but can be seen as more exclusive, at the risk of producing more generic and inauthentic content. And also, as Chin and Homeyard sort of observe here, unequal power relations between people with intellectual disabilities and support as professionals can be reproduced in literacy events, including involving accessible information. And it's interesting to think, how does the introduction of Gen AI potentially disrupt or reinforce these power relations? So that's something to really think about. And I think if we are to explore the potential of Gen AI technologies in this field, we should really recognize these traditional practices of co-production and checking. They remain a really valuable asset, I think. So we draw on quite critical perspectives. I think Katie and I do draw on quite critical perspectives of Easy Read. We do recognize that it is a sort of a one-size-fits-all solution to a large and diverse user community that actually have quite wide-ranging literacy and cognitive needs. And I think our project showed, given the opportunity and appropriate support, that having a disability should be no barrier to users becoming skilled and confident in using these tools, and that they can use them really effectively in highly personal and creative ways, really. So this does shift the focus, I think, from the production of accessible texts to the end user. And if we think about the potential of Gen AI to provide customizable solutions for individual users or groups of users, I think that's really interesting, particularly given the capacity of Gen AI to effectively sort of learn through repeated use and also to adapt to user-specific needs. But this does once again highlight the need for these tools to be accessible, of course. And it also, the need to recognize the significance of sort of emergent digital literacies that come with these technologies, and, the need to develop those technical sort of knowledge and skills, I think. I do want to just quickly mention images. As Katie shown, a particular significant component of Easy Read formats and practices is the use of images. And of course, images can be, symbolic and illustrative and metaphorical, etc. They can be incredibly culturally loaded, as we all, I'm sure, are aware of, and obviously open to bias, etc. And I think when it comes to more broadly sort of thinking about accessible communication, we do need to consider the role of accessible texts within the sort of wider ecosystem of not just working with images, but multimedia more generally, video, audio, etc. But, those sort of multimodal forms of communication. And certainly with images, when we think about the genre of images that are provided by, for example, photo symbols, which have that very inclusive approach to the production of images, involving learning disabled communities, but also obviously promote representation. What AI throws up can be highly problematic. If you ask for, representation of learning disabilities, we are getting into some highly problematic end results at the moment, the way the technology is. However, having said that, there is potential here, I think, for customization, personalization, images that reflect perhaps users' own sort of environments and communities. That's certainly something to consider. And I do just want to end a little bit on research because, research on EasyRead itself is quite sparse, and as I say, there is a real need for those particularly critical approaches. Katie and I obviously draw on those critical perspectives, I think, but also very much, participatory and inclusive approaches to researching this area. And I think if we are to explore the potential of generative AI in this field, it requires understanding specific interests and needs and issues. We can think about authentic use scenarios, case studies that, are really meaningful to the community, that are purposeful, that reflect everyday activities and information access sort of needs as well. And this we can expand this to other communities as well, of course, which I'm sure many in the audience will be thinking about as well. And I think it is about providing opportunities for for experts by experience and where necessary their allies to not only shape how EasyRead and generative AI is produced and used, but also how the develop, in terms of the development of the technologies themselves, I think. So we have some links there. We will be sharing these slides later with everyone. And we also have references there as well. So I hope that was interesting. Thanks for your time, and I'll hand back to Kelly, perhaps, or Laura.
Yeah, that was fab. We have one question. Thank you so much. I was like absorbed, so I'm like still digesting. So we've got one question so far. Please, people, put your questions in the chat or stick your hand up or take the mic, shout out. One question we do have already is from Michael. Did you notice any bias with the content that was produced? I don't know who.
So I will take that one first. Yeah. I think it's really important to stress that with our project, we did use as our source texts, so the actual text that were being inputted into these tools was just the articles. So in a way, we are limiting the source material to the actual articles themselves, which I think does reduce that sort of bias in terms of what these tools are drawing on, in terms of what they've been trained on, etc. But obviously, when we ask them to summarize and to put things in context, we are aware that they are drawing from outside these texts. And I think if any sort of summarizing of text, they do, these tools do tend to draw on, we assume, on wider sort of training material that they've been developed on. I mean, the example with EasyRead, for example, we said, when we asked them to do it as EasyRead or Easy Language, their interpretation of that, if you like, was quite problematic in terms of providing, presenting quite inappropriate material. So clearly, you can limit what these tools are working with by providing the source material. That's very different to saying, just asking a general question where it will trawl lots of, sources from God knows where. If you are producing the source material, the source text, if you like, That obviously does limit, it does focus these tools on those source texts, but we are very much aware that it is drawing, in producing these summaries, it is also drawing on, on sources outside of these texts in interesting ways. So we did see some bias, but it was limited, I would suggest. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Katie, or any other perspectives on that.
No, I think that's a good summary.
That's great. Thanks, guys. We've got a whoops. This is a this is a bit of a thing with the Zoom chat box. Is that sometimes it jumps up and down as people add things or like things, whatever. And we've got an absolute bonanza of questions from Dee at Cambridge. Some good ones here. One, and it's kind of not so much about the content itself, but I suppose a kind of bigger question about the impact of AI on skills and capacity and things. Will these platforms create less understanding and knowledge of how to write in easy English or easy read language? I don't know, that's I suppose it's a bit sort of broader question. I don't know if you've got thoughts around this about the potential sort of impact, or are they reaching people that maybe wouldn't have actually learned how to do it? I don't know. What's your thoughts around this? Do you think it's a good or bad thing, or neutral?
I think it's really interesting, and actually, I guess I'm feeling on the positive, thinking that actually, if people are doing this work themselves, sort of using these tools, then they can see what goes into it and how language can influence the sort of content and the meaning of things, and how to tweak, and also how to personalize things, which I think is really important. So thinking about the audience. So I'm feeling positive in that it will make people think about the writing and the reading more. I don't know what you think, Andy.
No, I don't have anything particularly to.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting topic about the impact of these things on. I mean, actually, more broadly with accessibility, the role of, if there's lots of tools being rolled out to support, does that mean people will feel they don't need to learn the skills, or maybe does it imply that, oh, these things are a bit of a hassle to do, so let's get AI to do it? I don't know. I think it's a very interesting thing worth exploring. And also, just another question from Dee is, how does this link in, or does it link in with things like the Plain English campaign? Is there a relationship there between Easy Read and Plain English, or?
I have an excellent link that of a blog that I came across, discussing the differences between plain language and plain English. I'm just going to pop it in. Yeah, so I mean, they are connected in a way, in terms of, they're both sort of advocate for clear language, but they're not, linked in great deal in terms of sort of politically or anything. And there's quite a big difference in terms of the user focus, I think, between, according to this blog, plain language and plain English. So plain English is quite like prescriptive in some ways, saying that some words shouldn't be used, whereas the plain language sort of approach is more sort of thinking about the user. And I think that's probably more how Easy Read works, is thinking about the different people that might be reading. So for some people, some words can be, a word might be seen as difficult, just a hard word, but if that person, the reader, your intended reader, is using that word every day because of the situation that they're in. So, for example, I'm thinking about asylum seekers in this situation. Some of the words in asylum are really quite complex, but because it's such an important word for that person, they'll know that. So you sort of have to think of the user and the audience more, and I think that's Easy Read probably aligns more with that idea in language.
Thanks.
I think we've got another question here that's from Mike, but a different Mike. How do you measure the Easy Read level?
That's a good question, and I don't think we really do. So we do in terms of testing. So there's sort of various tests that we would do with in sort of with advocacy groups and checking groups. So the sort of standard user research style testing, in which there's lots of different methods. But in Europe, they're very much more, seem to be more focused on the different sort of European framework, and consider sort of that as the main way to sort of group the different bands, which is why you can see on some of those European tools they are quite clearly this is A1, this is B1. But yeah, I think there's a lot of research to be done in that sense. And you know, generally, I think it's it's really an under researched topic.
I think I would just add to that in terms of, you know, I think this, I mean, clearly Katie has linguistic background and that's one sort of disciplinary aspect. I have an education background. I think there's lots of disciplines that feed into this. You know, we can think about sort of communications and media as well, particularly when we start talking about images and things like that. And obviously, you know, we're very much aware that the Easy Read world, which is focused around the learning disabled community, you know, this also sits within, you know, sort of broader aspects of you know, cognition and different aspects of, you know, different reading ages and stuff like this, and you know, there's potentially a wide range of very interdisciplinary aspects of this, that some of which are outside of Katie and I's expertise and disciplinary knowledge. But I think it's really important to recognise this, and you know, that there is so little academic research in this field. But you know, I think it is also important to recognise that some of the expertise and the knowledge in this field has been done through practitioner level. You know, it's been created by people like Katie who do, you know, work with groups in co-producing these sort of texts and stuff. And so there is a lot of expertise, but it's been done at that sort of, you know, practitioner sort of level. But yeah, you know, there's so many different aspects to this, you know, different disciplinary sort of aspects of this that I think we can draw on and we can invite sort of research into. But as I say, it's a field which is really needing some further research, and that's before you start throwing in the generative AI stuff, you know, and the use of these technologies and the potential impact of these technologies. You know, clearly you know, the affordances of scalability and cost and all of these things, and the rapidness of the, you know, in which these tools can be used are clearly, you know, impacting on the traditional practices around easy read production, as I sort of touched on earlier. So we do need to be, I think, bringing in people from different fields and different disciplines to really engaging with this stuff. And a lot of it, you know, as somebody who is researching within the sort of broader field of digital accessibility as well, I think it you know, one of the great things about being invited here today is by Kelly and Laura is that this is an overlooked area, I think, in the field of accessibility and digital accessibility. And I think it needs to, you know, we need to have that engagement within that field as well. So yeah, I think that's a long sort of answer to, probably wandered off in a different direction there a little bit, but yeah, I think these things are really important.
Yeah, sorry, and I absolutely agree that readability formulas are one way that people do test that sort of ease of understanding. But I think I mentioned earlier there are sort of issues there around context and assumptions that are made within easy read formulas. Sorry, readability formulas.
Okay. Great, lovely. We've got a few more minutes for just for a couple of last questions. I'm going to sort of mash these two together because I think they both relate to quite a bit to the idea of, Andy, you touched on your presentation around, journal articles and things being, and scientific papers being put into easy read, especially when they're about people who would benefit from easy read format. But also, I guess, more broadly as well, you were discussing, I think in response to one of the earlier questions about feeding in, contextualized articles and things to improve. So we've had a couple of questions, and one of them was around how are lecturers okay? I guess this is an intellectual property perhaps question. Are lecturers okay with their work being popped into the AI, or are there any kind of, do people have any concerns around that? And then the other question was, and I think Katie, you did touch on some of this, what about when the article has a lot of scientific or technical or medical terminology or jargon? How is that dealt with? So I guess that's two questions. One is the lecturer kind of attitude towards their work being input, and then also how do you deal with those more kind of complex scientific concepts and language? So just leave it to whoever wants to take that.
If I just quickly draw on our workshops, that the thing around jargon is really important, and particularly if you're talking about information related to health and things like that. What we did find, as I say, that supplementary use that I talked about in the workshops, where they were actually moving away from developing these summaries to actually use the tools to explore the meaning of certain terms, etc. Now, whether the tools themselves are the best source of material, to check those things is questionable. But I think what it draws out, I think, is the fact that certain problematic terms or jargon, if you like, do need to be fully explained, perhaps as part of the final sort of text or whatever, where there is, if it's a particularly health, related issue or something like that, or a legal issue, perhaps, oversimplification can be problematic, I think, and it may be that those particular aspects or terms do need to have a more sort of significant, content related to it, perhaps. But, that's just really from the findings of our project, I think.
That's great.
As for maths things are, not being a maths educator, I can see how that's a totally different sort of area as well. It's, yeah, I think it is really, it's a really interesting question, and it's one of those things that we need to be very mindful of as we progress with our potential use of these tools, I think.
So, and Katie's popped some links as well in the chat. I think that's an interesting one about learning from the legal field, because I can imagine there's lots of content there that would be highly relevant. And that's, we'll have to get, I don't know if John's here actually, our colleague John Kelly does all our kind of legal and regulatory stuff. That would be interesting to get his opinion there. That's great. We've only got a couple of minutes towards the end. So rather than starting another question, I think we'll kind of keep it all nice, and because people might have to rush off to another meeting. Katie and Andy, thank you so much. That was just really, really useful. And you've given us loads and loads of links. So I think this is something, like you were saying earlier, I think it is hugely overlooked, the kind of linguistic aspect of accessibility, but especially this more kind of specialist area. But it's one of these things, I think, if you know how to do this, then you can make all your language more accessible. It's a really, really useful skill. And I think a lot of us are going to have a play around with some of those Gen AI tools as well, and suss them out. But thanks so much. We will, I think, Laura, we will probably be having another drop in April, the first Wednesday in April, are we? I don't know. Let's decide it now. It's before Easter, it's before the
Do you all
holidays.
want to come again in April? Yes, I think give us a thumbs up. We'll do that. We don't usually, because usually the Easter holidays fall right at the front, but they don't this time.
Yeah,
So
Easter's a bit later.
I see thumbs up going up. So I think it's on. We better start planning.
Yeah, it'll be a surprise.
Yeah.
But do also as well, do feel free to send us your suggestions for topics, or if you would like to present or share some of your own work. We're always open to hearing about that as well. Or if you'd like to have topics for just discussion, these drop-ins are for you guys, and are really a forum for you. So we're here to serve. We'll make it happen. So so thank you everybody, and thank you as well always to Edward for looking after us all and making sure it all runs smoothly in the background. And the video will probably pop up and be posted to YouTube and our drop-in page. Probably, well, we'll see. Next week is a bit mad because it's DigiFest, so I don't know everybody.
Yeah, so if anyone's coming to DigiFest, we'll be there at the community. We've got a couple of sessions, so come along and speak to us.
Yeah, we'll be in the hub, and we're doing some things as well. So come along if you're in Birmingham for DigiFest next week on Tuesday and Wednesday. But yeah, video usually goes up the following week, just once all the captions are checked and corrected and things.